Hi, everybody, and welcome to Metaphysical Insights. I'm William Becker, your host, and with me today, I have a very special, lovely friend. Um, I was going to say my partner in crime, but it's too early to incriminate ourselves. Ms. Kathy Wiseman. Now, Kathy, as some of you may have read in my promo, um, Kathy was the executive or the director of the Pioneer Center in Oregon City, the senior center, the community center. And the government in Oregon City doesn't like to talk about um, ghostly stuff, but Kathy is retired. So now she can talk about ghostly stuff. And it's frankly, I think one of the more haunted buildings around town. Um, and for lots of good reason we'll get into. Kathy is also really amazing at knowing people's spirit animals, which was just um, a skill set she had that I didn't find out about until not long ago. So, Kathy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And you always add a ray of sunshine to everything, so it's good. Um, if people have questions at any time, go ahead and type them in and or comments. I may just post them up if we're in the middle of something. I may not read them, but I can show them so Kathy can see it, so other people see it. And if it's a question, we will try to answer it as best we can as we can work it in. And I wish I could see who all was live viewers. Who's this? I can't tell. Oh well, never mind. Um, Me and technology. I'm a medium, and I'm an old-fashioned historian. I believe in, you know, um, hurricane lamps and scribes and telegraph and um, ed, well, not Edwardian dress in the desert, but anyway. Um, okay, so we're off to a good start today. You know me; it's always a kind of a you'll get what you get type of a day as I stumble around. Um, Kathy, let's start a little bit with the background with you and paranormal. I mean, have you always had ghostly experiences? Have you always believed in these things or
Well, I never, when you're a young person, it's not something that you think about or have people talking about to you. But I've had some experiences that were pretty unusual. And the first one was about the third grade. And I was staying with a friend from school. And I cannot tell you what religion they were or what they were practicing, but I can tell you as a third grader sitting at the dining room table with my friend Kim and her mother and two older sisters. And around the home, they had lots of pictures. They were the soft, it was like the chalk drawings, but it was the soft chalk, like pastels, I guess. And they had square boxes of pastels with all the colors in them sitting next to them. And each adult had a piece of paper in front of them. And around the home, they had dozens of pictures of different types of people, some in headdresses, some in turbans. Um, and they would channel people and spirits, and they would be sitting talking like you and I are.
Mhm.
Looking in your eyes, and their hands would move. They wouldn't look at their hands, and they would pick up a craypaw pastel, and they would draw without looking, which I found fascinating. I mean, as
Right,
a kid, you look at things and you draw them.
right.
And so I sat there just mesmerized by this. And the mother and the oldest sister were drawing pictures. They would just become a person. that they were drawing. And then on the back, they would fold over the paper. And then this person that they were channeling would write their story, who they are.
Okay.
And it was fascinating. I wasn't scared. I wasn't worried until it was her middle sister would pick up the coloring, the crayons, and she just started rubbing it back and forth very quickly until the whole thing just turned black, the whole page. And they were very concerned that she was channeling dark spirits.
Okay.
And the family, I was there for quite a while, staying with my friend, because we were together, going and picking berries and doing things that young girls do together. So I got to be part of the family as they understood something not great was happening. And so they sent her to live with an aunt and uncle. And the aunt and uncle made a phone call, and I was there to listen. And when she arrived, they assigned her a bedroom, and a box of pears were in the corner. And by the next morning, they had all rotted.
The pears had
And
rotted?
the pears had all turned black and rotted.
Wow.
Like overnight. So they were extremely concerned. And there was a parakeet in her room that also died. So that became sort of a concern. I was getting worried about those things.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole process was fascinating. And then, of course, I went home. So I never knew what ended up happening, but that piece of what I observed and, participated in just by listening and observing, it was fascinating, but the dark spirit component was worrisome.
Right.
So I didn't really have any further encounters until about a freshman in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And we had moved into an old Selwood home just as I was starting high school. And that home had a very heavy presence, and I could not sleep in the home unless the lights were on. So I always had the hall light on, and the basement was extremely heavy. And I just didn't go down there. And silver things would disappear. So I had some silver earrings, or at the time I was reading a book with a silver cover, and they would just disappear and end up in random places. No rhyme or reason. And when I moved out, when I finished high school and moved into college, it was then that my mother told me, when we first moved in, her encounter that she never told the family because she was worried we would, be under a lot of distress with what she encountered. She had gone before us, before we moved in, to clean and get the furniture kind of set up. And she was downstairs scrubbing the bathroom.
Uh-huh.
And she heard heavy stomps upstairs, stomp, stomp, stomp. So she thought someone had come home. So she went upstairs to see who it was, and no one was there. So she went back downstairs and scrubbing the bathroom, stomp, 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 and it frightened her. So she had closed the door and hid in the bathroom, didn't hear anything, and then tried to leave the bathroom, and the door would not open. So she went back to the corner and just sat and cried for a while. She was really frightened. And then finally got up, opened the door, and left, and wouldn't come back into the home until the rest of us came, because I guess there's safety in numbers.
Right.
But when we moved out of that home, when they moved out years later, the owner of the home told her that his mother had died in the home, and that she had lived there for a very long time and never wanted to leave. So we can only imagine that she was still there and maybe felt a little put upon by this group of people that had moved in.
Right. That makes sense. And especially you're doing things to the house and you don't know she's there, so you're not communicating. I mean, at that point, um, a lot of times if you say, "Hey, look, we love the house, and so we're doing all this to maintain it or keep it so it's nice," they really appreciate it. Other times they just
Mhm.
say, "What the heck are you doing?" Um,
Exactly, and we had a
mhm,
lot of pets, and we were teenagers, and so we were probably pretty loud, and, it was, you know, probably not her preference.
right, especially if she'd lived there by herself a long time.
Mhm. Yes,
Ah, I wonder if they had more activity after you left.
I don't know, but after that, living in that home, anywhere I would go to move, especially
Mhm,
with an older home, before I would agree to live there, I would have to go and see how it felt.
yeah,
Because if it was a difficult place to live where I couldn't feel comfortable by myself, I just would not. I prefer not to go there.
right. And in Oregon, people don't have to declare if a house is haunted,
Exactly. So you
which
never.
I guess I understand because um, people can lie about it to make it a selling point to say it is for the right people. And how do you prove, really? I mean, the jury is still out to most people about whether or not these things even exist. So I guess I can see the point in not having to declare, but it's yeah, it can be disturbing that way. We're getting people from all over the world watching, by the way, Kathy.
Oh, great.
As far away as Japan, several places around the U.S., and um, I think Annette's in England. Um, so just as a heads up. Um, okay, so sorry,
It's all right.
I derailed us both. Um, have you had much more activity in any of the other houses, though, or were you pretty good at spotting the ghost inhabited ones and staying away?
Pretty good at that. The next big encounter was working at the Pioneer Center. Most of the homes that I'd lived in after Sellwood were mid 70s. We lived in one home that was a historic home, but didn't feel any presence and no concerns. But really, the Pioneer Center is a place of significant activity.
Why don't you bring us into the life journey of Kathy Wiseman and the ghosts of the Pioneer Center?
The Pioneer Center. Well, I started there. I was hired in 2004, and I met the staff in an interview, and they gave me a tour, and it was very exciting. And I was thrilled to have an opportunity to work there because I've always loved Oregon City, and it's a beautiful community. And I lived in Oregon City at that time, so the commute was great.
Hmm.
And I was offered the job, and it had been left in pretty bad repair, the physical building. And the staff were struggling with some just long-term neglect of policies and assignments of jobs.
Right.
So I rolled up my sleeves and I thought, well, the city was in some financial trouble and that building was in horrible repair. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is job security. So I better get going on fixing this up. So I would stay late most nights. Everybody would leave at around 4 o'clock, turn off all the lights and shut off the radio, and out the door they would go. So I was there by myself, which was fine because that's when I got most of my work done. There was less
Right.
distractions. But very quickly, like within the first month, I would be typing, be at my desk typing, and I would see a shadow move by.
Hmm.
And so, of course, I would look. Um, the hair on the back of my neck would go up, and I would ignore it. And I'd go back to typing. Well, the shadow would come again, a very dark shadow, just quickly moving by.
Mhm.
So I would get up and I'd walk out to the hall and say, hello, is anyone here? Hello, hello. No one was ever there. And I would walk around because I really didn't want to be in this big building by myself with another person
Right.
that I didn't know. So I would walk around and check, and nobody there. And sometimes it was enough that I would just I would just say I've had it, and I would just leave the
Right.
building because it was really distracting. Sometimes there would be the sound of the door opening and closing, the back door. So I would
Okay.
assume it was a staff person coming back. So I'd get up, see who it was. Nobody there.
And those are the big heavy metal doors that are very distinct in their sound, and they're
Yes,
close to your office.
yes. So you could, I wouldn't hear them open, but I would hear them clunk shut.
Right.
There were times that the men's room, it would sound like someone was in the men's room. So I would go check that. And usually, it felt okay to go around. It was a little concerning that you couldn't, because it's a big building. People could hide in there pretty easily.
Right.
So you'd sweep the area. Nobody in there. Check all the doors. They're locked. But one of the times I was looking around the building to make sure I was there by myself, there's a very long hallway that goes down to the kitchen. And as I stood there, I looked down the hallway and it just elongated. And it was very disorienting, and it made me kind of dizzy. It made me really frightened. And at the end of it is one of those green exit signs. And it just seemed to get further and further and further away. And I thought, well, that's really strange and I don't prefer it. So that was again a night that I just said, I'm out tonight. I'm just done.
Yeah.
So as I continued to have these experiences, I said something to one of the staff people. I said, I hear a lot of noises at night. And she said, oh, this place is very haunted. And I said, well, thanks for telling me, first of all. And second of all, how do you know that? And she said that she had been in the building by herself once. And she comes very early in the mornings, and she saw a woman float. She thought another staff person was there, but it was a woman walking across the ballroom floor in a prairie dress.
Okay.
And she went to go see who it was because there were a lot of activities and whatnot throughout Oregon City that, promote pioneers and pioneer times. And she thought maybe there was an activity someone was doing. And so she went to see who it was in this prairie dress and never found anyone. So she had an actual, a sighting of
And
someone.
this is somebody solid enough that she thought it was a real living person,
Yes.
not
Yes.
somebody semi-transparent.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
impressive. Yeah.
So another employee also said that she struggled being in the basement of the Pioneer Center, that it always was scary to her. So she didn't go down there, especially by herself.
Was there one part of it in particular?
Yes, so if you go down the very long hallway, and right at the end of the hallway is a door and some kind of steep stairs to a cement basement area. And most of the center's decorations and things are stored there. But if you go down there, for the longest time, I really struggled going down there by myself. It was very heavy. And I had mentioned this to a couple people and who were interested in spirits, and they came by to ask me about it and went into the room above that basement and ended up getting some pretty severe migraines pretty quickly.
Okay.
So they said, yes, this is a very active area.
And
So
people remember that area, and because there'll be more as Kathy's unfolding, but some things that may come out later.
yes,
So just remember that.
that particular area has some significance for that building and that location.
Yeah.
So time went on, and these things continued to happen. Especially the dark shadow. It was like a
Hmm.
blob that would just move by. And that went on quite a while, a couple of years. And I complained about it a lot. I didn't like it because it was distracting, and I was trying to get some work done
Hmm.
regularly. And by then, I had started participating in the Heritage Partner Group, the Spirits of Oregon City.
Hmm.
And the typically it coincided with the Halloween time and a tour of the historic homes, and people would dress up in period wear and recreate a story, a themed story for that year, whether it was a boat catching fire and sinking, and the loss of life, just a historic piece. So as I participated more and started talking to people that were more open and friendly to these conversations, they were interested in what I was seeing and what was happening there. And it was about that time I had cleaned up after an activity, and I was wheeling a plastic cart, down that very long hallway with the green exit sign. And I thought, okay, I have to get this cart down to the kitchen. It was elongating and being weird again. I thought, just do it, just power through. And so I wheeled my cart down, and I stopped. They're big, wide, double wooden doors, and they're very heavy.
Hmm.
And I got my key to stick in to unlock the kitchen door. And I happened to look over, and there's a glass wall, there's glass windows and a door into a workout room, a weight room, basically, for seniors.
Hmm.
And on the end of the one piece of equipment, I don't know what it's called, but it's called a bench. It's a bench. Was a man sitting there. And my heart started racing. I thought I'd gotten locked in the building with a person that I didn't know.
Right.
And it terrified me. And my first thought is, I got to get out of here. So I shoved the key into the lock of the kitchen, and I looked back over, and he was gone. And it made me furious. I was mad. By then I was mad. So I decided that I was going to reach out to Rocky Smith Jr., who by then I'd gotten to know through the Heritage Group and the Spirits of Oregon City. And I trusted him to be someone I could talk to.
Yeah.
And so I asked him to come over to the Pioneer Center so I could tell him all these experiences I was having and how it was disrupting my work. And coming into the building, I never knew when it was going to be really intense or whether it was going to be okay. And he said, Kathy, all you have to do is tell them to leave you alone, and they'll stop.
Right.
Which I had never heard of ever. And I said, all right. He says, but why would you? It's so exciting. I said, well, I don't like it. And I'm busy. And this is distracting.
Yeah, it was exciting because it wasn't happening to him.
Exactly.
You move your office in here for a while.
And he loved, of course, the stories
Oh,
because
yeah.
so fascinated. And he had come a couple of times and spent time in that classroom area above the basement and could, feel
Yeah.
what was going on.
Mhm.
And he thought that was pretty great. I did not. So it was the next night. I couldn't wait to get back to work. And so when everybody left, turned everything off, I just stood at that apex of that hallway, the long hallway and the entry to the building. And I just yelled out, I'm sorry. that I'm here, um, disturbing you or not. I have to work here. I can't not be here. And I have to stay late because there's so much work to do. They've let this building fall apart and I have to be here and you're distracting me. So that was that. And I have never seen them again.
Wow. And you haven't heard them anymore either.
No, I never. There was no noises, there were no shadows, there were no elongated corridors, there were no, physical. I mean, the man in the workout room looked solid, just like you are looking to me. I thought I was locked in the building with someone I'd never met before.
Yeah. And now you figured out who that was with Rocky, didn't you?
Yes, because I was telling him about this man who was very stern, who had white hair and long, sort of, loose fitting sleeved, a long sleeve shirt and black pants. And he said, "Well, was that John McLaughlin?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know what he looks like." And so he took me outside and pointed to St. John's School, where there is a giant mural. And he said, is that him?" And I said, "Yes, that's him. That's who was in the weight room."
Yep.
Well, it was from Rocky that I found out that Dr. John McLaughlin and his wife were buried on the grounds of the Pioneer Center, actually where that basement was that so many people can't go down by themselves.
Yeah, just right there by the staircase.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you notice a difference when you get to about grave level?
Oh, yes.
And then again when you get beyond it?
Well, and basements are cold, but
Yeah.
there was a definite, like, it was one temperature and you get down, it was colder. It was just
Hmm.
like a line.
Hmm.
And particularly in that back corner. But it kind of made sense. And this is just my personal, having so many years at the Pioneer Center and going on so many tours of the historic homes. There was a woman, and I can't remember if she was a psychic or someone that channeled spirits, but she was on a tour that I was on. And we were at the gravesite of Dr. John McLaughlin and his wife at the McLaughlin house.
Hmm.
And someone said, "Well, they're buried here." And she said, "Well, they're buried here. Their bones are here, but they aren't here." I I believe Dr. McLaughlin is at the Pioneer Center, and that's where he stays. I don't know about her. And that may be why he's so active looking for her, because originally they were buried down below.
Right.
So there's something terribly amiss with his trying to either find her or figure out where he's at, but he is hooked into that Pioneer Center.
Yes, he is. And I want to give a little bit of a quick historical background so people not from here, because from what I'm seeing, everybody that is listening right now is nowhere near Oregon. Um, and Oregon City is the end of the Oregon Trail. In Oregon City, it's a small little town now, but it was the first capital of the Oregon Territory, which is or was Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and the western parts of Montana and Wyoming. San Francisco's plot map is here. Their charter was filed here because we were the first incorporated city, not the first settlement, but the first incorporated city west of the Mississippi. So you've got all that movement of people, and Dr. McLaughlin is considered the father of Oregon. He worked for the Hudson's Bay Company. He founded Oregon City about 1827, 1829, a mill site here and a trading post for Hudson's Bay. The city built up and all the rest. And I'm not going to go into tons of it, of history, but it gives you an idea and about why this man is so important too. The Native American peoples liked and trusted him. His wife was half Cree, I think. I know she was at least half Native, but I think it was Cree. Um, and these were these were some of the most important people in the Pacific Northwest at the time, and were a big part of us becoming part of the United States instead of Canada, because his job was really to keep us out and let Britain have this whole area. It was all up in the, up in the air at that point. So, you had some of the most important ghosts anywhere around haunting you, which is pretty amazing.
Well, and I can't say for sure, but it could have been the woman that my social worker saw floating across or moving across the ballroom. Could have been his wife. I don't know for sure.
Mhm.
But I know he was very active, and I never saw a female spirit there. I would see some low to the ground sort of dark movement,
Mhm.
kind of like a cat running by. And someone had advised me that that usually signified a child.
Okay.
Um, but that was just one time.
Yeah.
Usually I think it was him, and I think he was very powerful.
Yeah. And it's an interesting location. Um, Rocky and I have seen three shadow figures together out by the flagpoles, um, on the outside. That's by a a peace park with the sister city Oregon City has in Japan. We were doing a tour one night, and independently, I saw them and he saw them. And we talked later, and he asked, or I mentioned about him, and he wound up seeing him. And I've had my own experiences in that building. I haven't seen anything like you have in there, but I've watched the automatic doors open and close when there's nobody around. And I've heard music, and I've heard women's laughter when I've been the only one in the building. And it's, I mean, I've heard parties in there. And I don't remember when I was a kid, the McLaughlins were on that corner. And I always thought it was so bizarre to have two graves in the middle of a neighborhood. But the
Yeah.
Catholic Church, you see, they'd been married with the Catholic Church on Main Street. The church moved up the hill. The cemetery moved, although they're not sure how many people were in it. So, how many of those bodies are left on Main Street is a good question. But the McLaughlins were moved. But the Catholic Church built the school building first, not the church. So they had to stick the McLaughlins someplace until they had the church built inside it. And then by that point, they moved him to the house. And there could have been houses on those sites before the Pioneer Center was built. I just don't remember. Um, and
Yeah, that site was donated. That block was donated by a family a long time ago. So I don't know what was there. I don't know if anyone else was buried there.
right, I don't either. I just don't. It'd be interesting one day to get more history of the location.
Mm, it
And
would.
and across from it, then you have the Ermitinger House, which is haunted. The Stevens Den is in its third location. McLaughlins are in their third grave. Um, the Stevens Crawford House hasn't moved, but it's haunted.
Hmm.
And so it's in a very haunted neighborhood.
And so is the Carnegie Library.
Yes. And I take it back. I was a couple months ago, I was at the center waiting for the Heritage meeting, and it was early, and I saw a woman come in through the sliding door into there's a, for you that don't know it, there's an outside sliding door and then kind of an entry square area, and the inside door. It's like an airlock thing, only it's pretty good size. She came in, but she didn't come out either way, and there's no door in that into anything else. But she was there and gone in a second, and it was daylight. There weren't any reflections, and I didn't get a good look at her, but I thought it was just a person.
I think that having worked there as long as I did, and a lot of older people, originally it was built as a senior center where there were
Mhm.
activities, Meals on Wheels, a noon lunch, and then everybody goes home at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. But it's socialization, it's playing bingo, it's meeting other friends. And as you age and you lose friends or family, or they're working, and so you become somewhat isolated, that place became significantly important to people.
Yes.
And some people will come every single day. And in COVID, I had incredibly frail people coming to the building, looking in the window and asking when we were opening. We were in the middle of COVID, and it's hard to see an 89-year-old woman barely able to make it there driving to come and bang on the windows to ask, when can I come back?
Right.
Because it meant so much, that socialization piece. And so I'm somewhat positive that some of that emotional spirit gets attached to that building and the people there, the continued um, energy and noise and activity and music and gathering. And so
Right.
some of it, I think, is people just coming through on their way somewhere else because it was of such significance in a big piece of their end of their lives, like the last 20 years.
That makes a lot of sense. And even more than that, I mean, you have weddings there sometimes. You've
Mhm,
had funerals there. You have
mhm.
the daddy-daughter dance there, or have had. I don't know if it's outgrown the space or not. You've had ghost conferences there. I
Mhm.
know from experiences. I mean, you've had so many things there. And walking into that place, I don't I don't know if the city knows how lucky they were to have you, because you walk into that place any day of the week during the day, and it's alive. And there are people, I mean, you have people with sitting in the hallway with a cup of coffee chatting, you have people playing cards, you have people reading a book, you have people talking about books, you have a class over here, you might have some aerobics or something going on in the gym, or a dance lesson, or you've got a band playing big band songs from the 30s and 40s, and a bunch of people in there waltzing and doing the swing and the foxtrot. And I mean, it's
It
an
was moved.
incredibly amazing center.
It morphed into a really important cornerstone. And I always said I was very lucky to be able to work there as long as I did. I loved it so much, and I had such great support of the community and the citizens. And I always told the staff that this building is only limited in our imagination. It's
Right.
four walls and a roof, and you can do anything you want. It only is limited by our lack of imagination. And
Yeah.
I was fortunate to have really good people work there and an amazing community that would bring ghost conferences.
Right.
We're the only senior center in probably all of Oregon that ever had a ghost conference.
Right.
We were willing to try anything, but we were able to partner with the lovely people that volunteered at the Ermitinger House. They had such knowledge as yourself. Rocky has always been a huge supporter.
Yes.
Um, and the ladies that volunteered at the Stevens Crawford and the library, which is, I know, is significantly haunted because there's heavy presence in that basement. And if things were going on that Mr. Carnegie did not prefer, his picture that hung up in the stairwell would turn.
Uh-huh.
He didn't care for certain things.
And the children's section of the library was in that lower level when I was a kid, and it was a little off-putting going down there. And it was bright and it was cheery. It was set for kids. They did a good job, but you could feel this doesn't feel as touchy-feely friendly as
Exactly.
Hmm.
Um, it was more severe. It felt like an old librarian watching you.
Right.
Um, and more than once, I heard some little kid say, "Ugh, that's creepy down there."
Uh,
So that building, the old part had a lot of folks roll through there too over the
mhm.
years that have come and gone.
It's an
And
old Carnegie Library, everybody. So it was built, I think, in the 20s, or was it 1912 or 1922, 24? I can't remember.
I don't recall. I want to say 22, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I've always said, looking at that beautiful area where you've got the Unitarian Church, which is directly across the street from the Pioneer Center as well, which is very old.
It's a pink
Um,
castle
it's a pink castle and it's beautiful.
with a complete collection of signed Povey Brothers stained glass windows.
Exactly. Beautiful, beautiful building. And for me, I always said that was the living room of Oregon City. That
Yeah,
was our living room.
it was.
And it's it's a beautiful, beautiful area. Really fun to walk through and try and remember what it used to look like and the people that walked there.
Yes,
And I think they still walk there. It's just unless you're open to hearing them or seeing them, you miss them.
right. And that area is in what's called the McLaughlin neighborhood. And it's Oregon City has three levels. We have the Main Street level, which is the original town, and it goes to the Willamette Falls, which is the second biggest waterfall in the continental U.S. by volume, second only to Niagara. And then a little later, the McLaughlin neighborhood was developed. There were some houses there and such, but it was late 1800s before it started developing a lot. And a lot of the houses up there were moved around a little as the subdivisions came in. And then you've got the very top of the hill, which was, out in the middle of nowhere back in the day. And it's just so there's a little bit of an idea of the history and the geography. So that area is surrounded by beautiful old homes. Now, for those of you overseas, okay, 1870 isn't old. Oregon City, it's old. Um, and so um, it sets that. It's like reading Lewis's Main Street, or not Sinclair Lewis. Is that his name? Anyway, with the ideal kind of small town park, and where everybody comes. And it's
And
changed,
old trees,
unfortunately.
beautiful
Yes.
old trees that add so much significance. And you can, if you just close your eyes a little bit, you can almost pretend you're back in 1890.
Yep.
And it's
Hmm.
a lovely area. But yes, very very rich with ghosts and spirits and whatever your word you choose, but people that have come before us.
Yep. And I
And
haven't found anybody there threatening or anything else. They're all fine.
I think more of it. I think Dr. McLaughlin was kind of severe.
Yes, he was in life.
Yes, and I think that's what he brings to the table now. And so when you're in the presence, well, especially if you grew up with nuns, which I did, having someone severe around, you get a little nervous. Makes you
Right.
nervous that you're going to be doing something wrong, and so you're on high alert. And I feel like he still brings that to when he's around. You
Well,
feel
and
a
he
severe
was
presence.
an he was very instrumental in getting the Catholic. Well, it was a cathedral first, built in Oregon City, and a Catholic school down on that site. I think it was a girls' school at first, and so yeah, he could remind you of the bishop even, um,
Mm-hmm.
and his. His heart was really good, though, the attitude. And the people of Oregon City and the state treated him so badly. He was, by the time he passed away, he was pretty bitter. So that probably comes through as well.
That could be. The only other thing that I can encounter that was interesting, and I hadn't seen anything like it before. It was one of our spirits events. And we had a great relationship with the Best Western, and the staff
Mhm.
there participated. And they would come, and this sounds very cheesy, but you have to imagine a cemetery at night, very dark, and lanterns and jack-o'-lanterns were lighting the cemetery. It was really beautiful. But they would dress in sheets, and they would be off in the distance, and so they looked like they were just walking around with lanterns looking
Uh-huh.
at headstones, and then they would float off, and it was being as far away as they were, it really looked like they were floating, and they were surreal, and I loved it. I just thought it was a beautiful part of what we were trying to create, which is a cemetery with spirits, and then telling stories of the
Right.
bell ringer and someone who had passed away, and the significance of the Josephine's rose.
Hmm.
And the funny thing was, it would be so beautiful to look at, and then people would get back on the bus and leave the cemetery, and then the sheets would come off and the cigarettes would come out. And so we would just tease them about that, and they'd, hang out. They were kind of young people, and then the bus would come and back with the sheets and back to the floating. And so it was really a good time. But at the end of the night, they all kind of clumped up because they were all coworkers, and they were walking up the path. And I had a camera. This was before phones had cameras, and I took a couple of pictures of them. And when I downloaded them, and there were no cigarettes, so these weren't indications of cigarettes,
Right.
but it was them laughing, and they had their sheets, and there were neon squiggles all through these pictures. And I'm looking at it, and I said, what the heck is that? And so I called Rocky, and I said, can you come look at these pictures? This is really weird. And he said, well, those are spirits. Those are actual pictures. They were just neon random squiggles through these pictures.
Hmm.
You just caught some activity.
Yeah, I would believe it. I know a lot of people have seen things physically there. I haven't caught anything yet. And the part of the cemetery she's talking about is the oldest municipal owned cemetery in the state. And it's where the earliest, some of the earliest pioneers and explorers and settlers of the Oregon Territory are buried. So there's a huge amount of history in that part of the
Mhm.
cemetery. And it's still a working cemetery. I mean, my folks are up there. Not in that part, in one of the new parts, but um, and it's part of originally a donation land claim.
And it's a lovely, interesting historical walk. If you get to Oregon City, it's definitely worth walking through and looking at the gravestones. And what I love about that event that we would put on there is, in between tours, you could look at these beautiful stones and how old they are. I mean, and
Right,
again, granted, we're not as old as someone in Europe, obviously, but for where we come from, these were the first people here
right,
that had traveled over that very difficult Oregon Trail.
right. And that's not diminishing the role the Native Americans had. They were here first. But as far as the white settlers coming in, um, and the native population, the diseases and intertribal warfares because of diseases had pretty well decimated the tribes around here before the settlers got here. There were still quite a few people living here, but nowhere near the thousands there had been. It was more like in the hundreds, which is tragic in itself.
Well, and if you listen to the stories of the Oregon Trail, um, our dear friend Marge Harding could tell amazing stories, especially of the difficulty for women coming across the trail and for
Yeah,
children, and who was left by the time they got here and who was incredibly sick by
right.
the time they got here, and people trying to help them recover, and then obviously so much loss. And that cemetery houses a lot of just, headstones of severe difficulty crossing that incredibly long, hard Oregon Trail.
Yeah, I need to check with Wendell Baskins, but I think it's close to 2,000 miles, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
And um, those oxen and cattle and wagons didn't move too fast.
No. Well, and you think about women in those ridiculous hoop skirts trying to create a campfire, and the severity of the burns, and women died, and their children died, and these poor men that were left just grief stricken and sick, and it was very painful coming across the country that way. And so we house a significant piece of that history of who was left.
Yes, right. And, girls, if a girl was 13 or 14, she was marriageable on the trail. And you got twice the land if it was a husband and wife than just a man. And so if a man was single or lost his wife on the trail and there was a single teenage girl or older, they often would get married. Um, and the some of the stories of abuse of women at the time, not necessarily on the trail, but just in general, and what was allowed. It may have been frowned upon, but it was certainly allowed.
Hmm.
Um, was horrific, mind-boggling, and not all the men were that way. It's just there were no laws protecting the women.
Hmm.
The one woman, Charity Lamb, that did protect herself in a way wound up in prison and the insane asylum for
Yeah.
murder.
It was a difficult time, and that cemetery represents what a difficult time.
Yep.
So it's definitely worth, if you're in Oregon City, it's definitely worth a visit. And I know the parks staff hold that cemetery in um, a great place in their heart. They care about it a lot. They
Yes.
really find that to be a significant piece of their job responsibility, which is nice, because if you look at the Pioneer Center of our neighboring town, Milwaukee, it's volunteers trying to maintain that. And it's hard. It's really hard to maintain a cemetery. So the Parks Department um, really deserves our heartfelt thanks for keeping that important piece of our history really well cared for.
Yes. And for um, our loved ones that are up there currently too.
Mhm.
Um, and I've applauded the parks with my folks anyway. Uh, even in commission meetings, I got up and thanked them for how good it was. I'm good at complaining. I need to be as good about praising when it's due, you know?
Well, it's definitely worth a trip to see the living room of Oregon City and then that cemetery. And taking a tour of the area, because there's a lot of pieces that are so interesting.
Mhm.
Um, the ghost tours with you and Rocky are such a good time and so informative. And then you can wrap it up with a lovely, happy hour or dinner. It's a really nice evening, and I've enjoyed doing that
Yeah,
once.
I've enjoyed doing it. Rocky's tour company is Northwest Ghost Tours, nwghosttours.com. So if you're coming out here, do that. The cemetery has a map that shows where the different areas are and who's famous, or the different pioneers where they're buried. There are walking tour maps of the older parts of Oregon City available. So there are some resources for you to find. I want to switch gears now, slightly. You have blown my mind as I've watched you come up with spirit animals for people. And you gave me mine last night, or yesterday afternoon. How do you do this? And how long have you been doing this?
Well, yours was particularly hard, and
I take that as a compliment.
it was. You were more complex. Some people are just easy to spot. Some people just take a little longer. You were probably the longest one I had to think about, and I kept trying to fit you into something that you just weren't. And so I just had to let it go. I figured, oh, it'll come to me. And it did at 2:00 in the morning. And it just was probably one of those, hardest to hit ones. It was like, all right, that's it. Sometimes I can look at a person and they just look like their spirit animal. It's usually a mammal that is attached to someone. I've had 3 birds. I've had 2 people that were dolphins. But usually it's either, and sometimes they're really interesting animals. We were talking about a woman that I hold in high regard, but she's very quiet, and she comes off as very sleek in her language, in how she talks, and she's very precise, but she's very watchful. But if you aren't watching her back, she can hit you upside the head with a big paw. And she is an ocelot, and she sits in a tree, and with her big tail swishing, waiting for the person to come by that she can then hit on the side of the head, and say, "Wake up, dum-dum. It's so obvious what I'm trying to tell you."
Right.
A particular man that I don't prefer, who I think is very full of himself, and I don't really find him of particular, well, this is going to sound weird, particular value. All species have a value, but he's definitely a peacock. And I'm sure you know who I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
But someone that just floofs up his feathers and walks around and makes a lot of noise.
Yes.
Otherwise, what else is there to a peacock?
Right.
They're very noisy and they're very showy-offy.
And you get up close and look at them, and they all look like they have lice.
Well, that's an added bonus. But as a group, especially when I worked for the Parks Department, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was looking at our team one day. This is when I started really talking about spirit animals, because of how our team was interacting. And it was a stressful time for our management team, and we were having some growing pains. And I got really frustrated with the parks director at the time. He was a very nice man, but I was very frustrated with him. And he wasn't getting what I was trying to tell him about my frustrations with some of my coworkers. So I marched on over there and to City Hall and met with him. And I said, "Look, we all have a spirit animal." And he was all excited because he was a very sweet man. He says, "Ooh, what am I?" And I said, "You are a panda bear. You just are a panda." And he liked that, because pandas are great.
Yeah.
They're not great leaders. They mostly
They're
roll.
very solitary, actually.
Yes, and they roll around and they're silly and they
Uh-huh.
eat leaves. But they're not. When you think of an animal leading a group of that, you don't think of a panda.
Mm-mm.
Um, he said, "Well, what are you?" And he was very interested. And I said, "Well, obviously, I'm a honey badger." And and I said, and my assistant director here is an ocelot. And I proceeded to tell him all of how we all function together. And people, what I find, are really interested in what their spirit animal is, but sometimes they don't like the animal attached to them because
Right.
they see themselves as something, an attractive animal versus an octopus, which was one of my coworkers. She's an octopus and she rolls along, grabbing at as much as she can, as fast as she can, with no regard to anyone around her.
Yep.
And that fit her perfectly. And she did not prefer that animal, but that is what she is.
Yeah, and I I know who that is. It's not anybody hasn't been around for a long time, but it's a perfect description.
And my beloved parks manager, who keeps our parks beautiful and is kind, um, he, of course, wanted to know what he was. And I said, well, you're a water buffalo. You're happy, munching, 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 doing your little business, and then something will set you off, and then off you go, and stompy, stompy, stompy. And he says, wow, that's perfect. So once people kind of think about their personality and what they bring to the world, to the relationships, um, then they kind of understand how I come to the conclusion I come to.
Mhm.
Um, whether you're a little high strung, whether you're someone that can sit and be thoughtful, or whether you're like with yours, it just hit me and it was perfect. I see you as someone who is very thoughtful and you don't react, you're not quick to react in a hysterical or an acute way. You're thoughtful, and you also rise. You're up here at this higher level, kind of looking around and taking in information. So it hit me that you are an owl and seeking information and looking and paying attention, but in a very quiet, subtle way. And that to me just was the perfect spirit animal for you.
And it works for me. I love it.
And
Uh,
I thought about that a lot today. I thought, is that the right one? And I said, yes, that is the right one. And it really has to do with someone's personality, how they perceive the world, and how they behave in the world.
yeah, that's fantastic. And you don't have a guide that shows you or anything. You just see
Mhm.
it and you know it.
And
That's a
people,
special talent and a very special skill set you have. It's
well,
really
and
quite valuable.
it's very fun because I'll tell someone about someone's spirit animal and say, oh, they always say, well, what's mine? And one of my employees, she really wanted me to tell her spirit animal. And she ended up being a ring-tailed lemur. And she said, I would have never guessed that in a million years. I'm like, well, go read about the ring-tailed lemurs and she came back the next day and she says, yep, that's it.
They're fascinating animals.
They are, and they're beautiful and interesting.
Yes. Hmm.
So I haven't assigned anyone an insect yet, but I was giving thought to someone in our city government that it came to me that he is probably a cobra. I'd never assigned a reptile either. So that's been sort of ruminating out there, and I think I've picked probably accurately.
Um, if it's who am I thinking of, yeah, that would make sense.
So
Um, yeah, it's fantastic. Does anybody else there have a question? Um, let's see. Here's something that Annette put up. earlier, and
I think that's right. That was when we were talking about spirits coming back who have been at the Pioneer Center and enjoyed
right.
it. I bet you that is an absolute accurate assessment.
Yes, I think you're right. Um, does anybody have a question for Kathy before we go? Do you have anything extra that you want to add to this fascinating conversation, Kathy? Anything
Well,
more?
this was very fun. I enjoyed it. I love being able to share these experiences because not everyone is as open as you are, William. And that's why I feel so connected to you and love you so much. And the same with my friend Rocky Smith. Very open to these experiences. When people don't believe, they'll say, well, that's crazy. That's not true. I don't know what's true and what's not true. I can only tell you what I've seen and what I've
Right,
felt, and I
exactly.
make no assumptions about it other than that.
Yeah.
So this was great fun, and I appreciate being able to come and talk to you about it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who's watched, and I'll have links to go back and watch it after the fact up later. And um, we'll see everybody back in a couple of weeks. And thank you all. Good night. And Kathy, it's such a joy, always. And I get to hang
Well,
out with you again, so that's great.
yay!
Good night, everybody.